We can get 3 junior engineers for your salary, he smirked during my termination meeting. Nothing personal, just cost cutting. My name is Carla Hayes, 54 years old, lead systems engineer at Summit Crest Housing for 18 years. I had built their entire infrastructure from the ground up, architected every expansion, and kept everything running so seamlessly that the executives forgot just how much the company depended on me until they decided they couldn't afford me anymore. I sat across from Evan Porter, the new chief technology officer who had been with the company for all of 6 months. He was 41, wore designer glasses, and proudly flashed his MBA from the University of Chicago. He'd been brought in to modernize operations, which apparently meant cutting the most experienced staff first. The severance package is generous, said Maria from Human Resources, sliding a folder across the table. 2 months' salary plus your accrued vacation time. I nodded, took the folder, and asked calmly, "Is that all you have to say?" Evan looked almost disappointed. Maybe he'd expected me to argue, threaten legal action, or cause a scene. Something he could report to the board to justify why I was difficult. "What would you like me to say?" "Most people in your position have questions, concerns," Evan offered. I gave a small shrug. "Seems pretty straightforward to me." Evan exchanged glances with Maria, both looking perplexed by my calm. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't calm, I was done. "There's a difference. We'd appreciate your help with the transition," Evan continued. "The new engineering team will need guidance on the system architecture. Maybe a consulting arrangement for a few weeks." "I'll think about it," I said, already knowing I wouldn't. We shook hands. I cleared out my desk in silence. 18 years of work fit neatly into a single cardboard box. I nodded goodbye to a few colleagues who avoided eye contact, each one quietly wondering if they were next. As I walked to my SUV in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Amy, the database administrator I'd hired 12 years ago. "Carla, the whole team's freaking out." I didn't reply. At home, I sat on the back porch overlooking Lake Michigan, sipping a glass of bourbon, watching the sunset streak gold across the water. My husband, Mark, placed a hand on my shoulder. "What will you do now?" he asked softly. I gave him a tired smile. "Something will turn up." What Evan didn't know, what he hadn't bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just built Summit Crest systems. I had custom-coded huge portions myself, often with minimal documentation, because the company refused to fund a proper documentation team. Only I understood the deep redundancies, the hidden security layers, the delicate architecture that kept everything running smoothly. And I wasn't planning to explain it to anyone. When I'd first joined Summit Crest, back when it was called Lakewood Properties, a small regional real estate firm with 4 apartment buildings and maybe a dozen employees, their entire IT setup was 2 desktop computers, a fax machine, and dial-up internet. The founder, Ray Lakewood, had hired me away from a consulting job in Madison, Wisconsin. "We're expanding," he told me back then. "We need someone who can build us something solid." Over the next 18 years, I transformed that basic setup into an integrated property management system that handled everything from tenant applications and background checks to automated maintenance requests and rent collection across 65 properties in 5 states. I didn't just do the work. I became the beating heart of the company's operations. And now, they were about to find out exactly what it cost to rip that heart out. If you'd like, I can continue writing the next part of Carla's comeback arc. Would you like me to? I'd build it piece by piece, adapting, upgrading, refining as the company grew. When Ray Lakewood retired 5 years ago, his son, Jason, sold the company to a private equity firm that rebranded it as Summit Crest Housing. They kept me on, impressed by what I had built. But slowly, things began to change. New executives arrived, new priorities took over, and suddenly quarterly targets mattered more than long-term stability. The warning signs came gradually. First, they rejected my proposal for a documentation team. "Too expensive," they said. "We'll get to it next quarter." That quarter, of course, never came. Then came the consultants, fresh-faced MBA types with polished shoes and big smiles, talking about disrupting property management and leveraging cloud solutions. They sat through my careful explanations of the system architecture with polite but glazed-over eyes, then enthusiastically recommended off-the-shelf solutions that wouldn't integrate with our custom infrastructure. I kept pushing back, calmly explaining why their approach wouldn't work, walking them through the custom code that made our system unique and resilient. Eventually, they stopped inviting me to the planning meetings. Mark, my husband, noticed before I did. One night over dinner, he gently said, "Carla, they're pushing you out. You need to prepare." I waved him off with a tired smile. They need me. No one else understands how the whole system works together. That, he said quietly, might be exactly the problem. 6 months ago, they hired Evan Porter as the new CTO. He came from a banking software company and arrived full of talk about standardization and legacy system replacement. Before long, he hired 3 junior engineers straight out of college and had them shadowing me, peppering me with questions about the system. I answered their questions patiently, but I could tell they weren't grasping the deeper complexities. How could they? It had taken me nearly 2 decades to build those systems, to understand the intricate interdependencies, to create the redundancies that kept everything running smoothly when inevitable problems arose. Last week, Evan stopped by my office, smiling casually. "Quick meeting tomorrow morning," he said. "Just a quarterly check-in." I should have seen it coming. The first call came 2 weeks after my termination. I was in my home office, updating my resume when the phone rang. Evan's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. "Carla, it's Evan. We're having some issues with the tenant portal. The junior team is working on it, but they're having trouble understanding some of your code architecture. Could you give us a call back? It would just be a quick consultation." I calmly deleted the message and went back to my resume. 3 more calls came that day, each voicemail sounding more anxious, more desperate. By evening, Amy texted me. "System's been down all day. Maintenance requests aren't processing." Evan's losing his mind. The next morning, Maria from HR called. "Carla, I hope you're doing well. I'm calling because we'd like to discuss a temporary consulting arrangement to help with some current system issues. The compensation would be quite generous." I picked up the phone. "How generous?" $300 per hour, minimum 4-hour engagement. "I'll think about it and get back to you," I said and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out at Lake Michigan. Mark placed a cup of coffee in front of me and sat down beside me. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. "I'm thinking," I murmured, "they're finally finding out exactly what I'm worth." Over the next 3 days, the calls increased. Evan, Maria, even Jason, who was still on the board. The tenant portal was down. Payments were delayed. Maintenance scheduling had collapsed. And I kept sipping my coffee, watching the ripples on the lake, finally feeling a quiet peace settle over me. If you want, I can continue the next chapter of Carla's comeback. Would you like me to? The maintenance scheduling system was throwing errors. The automatic payment processing had failed, leaving thousands of residents frustrated. I didn't respond to any of the calls or texts. On day 4, an email arrived from Lakeshore Systems, a regional competitor to Summit Crest. They managed fewer properties, but had been expanding rapidly. The email was from their director of technology, Samantha Fields herself. "Carla, I heard about your situation at Summit Crest. We've always admired your work from afar. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities with us? We're looking to upgrade our entire property management infrastructure." I replied and scheduled a meeting for the following day. That evening, as Mark and I were preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. Evan Porter stood on my porch, his designer glasses crooked, his normally crisp suit wrinkled and damp from the cold Chicago wind. "Carla," he began, voice tight with strain, "I apologize for showing up like this, but we have an emergency. The entire system is down. Nothing's working. The team can't figure out what's wrong or how to fix it." I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. That sounds serious, I said evenly. It is, Evan said quickly. We need your help. The board has authorized me to offer you a substantial consulting fee. $500 per hour, whatever it takes. For a moment, I let the silence stretch between us. I thought about the cardboard box in the garage, 18 years of work reduced to a few mementos. I thought about the phrase he'd tossed at me in that conference room, nothing personal, just cost-cutting. I thought about the documentation team they'd never approved. I'm sorry to hear about your troubles, I said quietly. But I have an interview tomorrow. I gave him a small smile. Something will turn up, just like I thought. And with that, I gently closed the door on his stunned face and went back to chopping vegetables. For the first time since my termination, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Just clarity. I wasn't going to help them fix what they'd broken. The interview with Samantha Fields went even better than I expected. We met at a small coffee shop in downtown Milwaukee, away from both companies' offices. I've followed your work for years, Samantha said, stirring her coffee. That integrated property management system you built at Summit Crest is legendary in our industry. No one else has anything close to it. Thank you, I said softly. It took time. That's what I want to talk about, time, she smiled. We want to build something similar, but we don't want to start from scratch. We need someone who understands the architecture, the integration points, the security layers. Someone who can build us something better than what's currently out there. I'm interested, I said, feeling the first flicker of excitement in months. Samantha smiled. Good, because I'm prepared to offer you the position of Chief Systems Architect. Full benefits, stock options, and a salary 20% higher than what you were making at Summit Crest. It was a good offer. Almost too good. Why me? I asked carefully. There are younger engineers out there, cheaper ones. Samantha laughed. You sound like your former employer. We tried that route. We hired 3 brilliant young engineers from top schools. They build us something sleek and modern that crashes every time more than 100 users log in at once. We don't need cheap. We need reliable. I accepted the offer the next day. Meanwhile, Summit Crest's problems were only escalating. Amy kept me updated through occasional texts. The system had been partially restored, but critical functions were still failing. They'd brought in a pricey consulting firm that specialized in legacy system recovery, but progress was slow. A week after I started at Lakeshore, Evan called again. If you'd like, I can continue writing the next part of Carla's journey. Just let me know. Carla, please, this is getting serious. We've lost access to payment records for the past 3 months. Tenants are complaining about incorrect charges. The consulting team says they need your input on the database structure. I was tempted to ignore the call, but something made me pick up. Evan, I said, calmly, I'm employed elsewhere now. Exclusive contract. I'm afraid I can't help you. We'll double whatever they're paying you, for just 2 days of your time, Evan pleaded. It's not about the money, I replied. Then what is it? Revenge? Are you enjoying watching us struggle? His voice was tight, almost desperate. I paused, considering my answer carefully. No, Evan, I said quietly. I'm not enjoying it. But you made a business decision. You decided my experience wasn't worth the cost. Now you're discovering what that actually means. The board wants to discuss bringing you back. Full salary, plus a signing bonus. For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it faded almost as quickly as it came. Going back would solve nothing. The same executives who decided I was expendable would still be waiting for the next excuse to cut costs. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I've made a commitment to Lakeshore Systems. Evan's voice hardened. You know, Carla, there could be legal implications if we find you intentionally made our systems difficult to maintain. Non-compete clauses. Intellectual property concerns. There was the threat I'd been expecting. The system is exactly as it was when the company repeatedly denied my requests for a documentation team, I said evenly. Every line of code belongs to Summit Crest, as specified in my employment contract. I've taken nothing with me but my experience. But feel free to have your lawyers contact mine. I hung up, my hands shaking not with fear, but with an anger I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel until that moment. The accusation that I'd sabotaged them was the final insult. At Lakeshore, I was starting fresh. I was building systems properly from the ground up, with full documentation, robust training programs, and redundancies that would prevent the kind of meltdown Summit Crest was now facing. I wasn't going to look back. But I wasn't going to help them either. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. About a month after joining Lakeshore, I got an unexpected visitor at my new office. Amy, my former database administrator, stood awkwardly in the doorway, a laptop bag slung over her shoulder. "Got time for lunch?" she asked with a half-smile. "There's a deli down the street." Over sandwiches in a noisy lunch crowd, Amy filled me in on the chaos at Summit Crest. "It's worse than you think," she murmured, leaning in despite the clatter of plates and conversation around us. "They've lost access to historical data going back 3 years. The backup systems are corrupted. The consulting firm is saying they might have to rebuild everything from scratch." I wasn't surprised. The backup system had multiple redundancies and carefully designed security protocols. Miss one step, and the entire process would fail, by design, to protect sensitive tenant data. "That's not all," Amy continued. "I found something when I was trying to help the consultants understand the payment processing system." I raised an eyebrow. "Evan had been planning your termination for months," she said quietly. "He'd been meeting with the board, convincing them that your custom infrastructure was too expensive to maintain." "How do you know this?" I asked. Amy pulled out her laptop and showed me a series of emails she had dug up in the system archives. Emails between Evan and the board, discussing the legacy staff reduction plan and specifically naming me as the first target. "If you'd like, I can keep going and write the next chapter of Carla's journey. Would you like me to continue?" He told them they could replace you with cheaper engineers and transition to off-the-shelf solutions within 6 months, Amy said quietly over our lunch. He projected cost savings of over $1 million a year. I read through the emails on Amy's laptop, feeling a strange detachment, almost as if I were watching someone else's story unfold. One line from Evan stood out, sharp and cutting. "Hayes' custom systems are unnecessarily complex. She's made herself indispensable by design, not necessity." "There's more," Amy added, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "The private equity firm that owns Summit Crest has been planning to sell. They've been prepping for it for over a year. Evan was brought in specifically to cut costs and make the company look more profitable before the sale." And just like that, everything clicked into place. The push for standardization. The resistance to proper documentation. The sudden obsession with cutting senior staff costs. It was never about improving the company. It was about dressing it up for a quick sale. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, looking up at her. Amy closed her laptop slowly. "Because I quit yesterday. And I'm not the only one. Half the IT department has left. The consultants are estimating at least 6 months to restore full functionality, maybe longer." She hesitated, then added, "And because Summit Crest's biggest client, Riverside Communities, is considering pulling out. They've lost faith in the management system." I sat back, doing the mental math. Riverside represented nearly 30% of Summit Crest's revenue. Losing them would be catastrophic, especially with a sale pending. "What will you do now?" I asked softly. Amy gave me a small grin. "Actually, I was hoping Lakeshore Systems might be hiring a database administrator." That afternoon, I spoke with Samantha Fields about bringing Amy on board. She agreed immediately. We were building a team, brick by brick, with people who understood what it meant to create systems that lasted. That evening, the inevitable happened, another call from Evan. This time, his voice had lost its usual polished authority. "Carla, please," he began, almost hoarse. "The situation is critical. Riverside is threatening to terminate their contract. The board is questioning my decisions. We need your help. I'm sorry, Evan, I said calmly. I can't help you. Name your price. Anything. It's not about price, I replied. It's about respect, for experience, for the work that goes into building something right the first time. There was a long silence on the line. You knew this would happen, he said finally, his voice low. You knew exactly what would break and when. No, Evan, I said quietly. I just knew what I had built and what it took to maintain it. I tried to share that information many times. I ended the call feeling neither triumph nor regret, just the quiet certainty that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. The opportunity came even faster than I expected. 2 months into my role at Lakeshore, Samantha called me into her office. I just got off the phone with Rachel Klein, she said, referring to the CEO of Riverside Communities. They're officially terminating their contract with Summit Crest next month. They want to know if we can handle their portfolio. Riverside Communities managed over 10,000 units across the Midwest. Taking them on would more than double Lakeshore's current operations. We're not ready for that kind of scale, I admitted. The new system is coming along, but it's only halfway there. Samantha leaned forward, eyes bright. What would it take to get ready if we had to? I paused, thinking carefully. 3 more senior engineers, dedicated server infrastructure, and at least 8 weeks of development time. Even then, it would be tight. Rachel's desperate, Samantha said quietly. I smiled faintly. Then we'd better get to work. If you want, I can write the next chapter of Carla's triumph. Just say the word. Summit Crest's failures were now affecting its reputation with tenants, and Rachel Klein of Riverside Communities was growing desperate. She was willing to give us 12 weeks and fund the infrastructure expansion we needed. This was the moment, the turning point. If Lakeshore Systems took on Riverside's massive portfolio and succeeded, we would establish ourselves as a serious competitor in the property management tech space. But if we failed, it could sink both companies. Let me think about the architecture, I told Samantha. I'll drop a plan on your desk by tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. I sat at my kitchen table, sketches and diagrams spread out across the surface, mapping data migration pathways, considering scaling challenges, and troubleshooting potential failures before they happened. By sunrise, I had a plan ambitious but achievable. It was a hybrid approach that would allow us to onboard Riverside's properties in stages, minimizing disruption to tenants and staff. When I presented it to Samantha later that morning, she studied it carefully. This is solid, she said finally. But I notice you've included a substantial documentation phase that adds 3 weeks to the timeline. It's non-negotiable, I replied firmly. That's where Summit Crest failed. We document everything from day one. We train the team on every component. No single points of failure. Samantha smiled. I trust you. Let's move forward. The next few weeks were intense. We hired 5 additional engineers, including 2 who had recently left Summit Crest, disillusioned and eager to work in a place where their voices mattered. Amy developed a database migration tool that could translate Summit Crest's tangled data structure into our new system. I designed a modular architecture that could scale seamlessly with Riverside's growing portfolio. Halfway through the project, I received an unexpected email. It was from Jason Lakewood, the son of Summit Crest's original founder, who still sat on their board. Carla, I want to apologize for how things ended. The board was misled about the implications of letting you go. Evan has been removed as CTO. We're struggling to recover, and Riverside's departure will hit us hard. If you're ever interested in coming back, the door is open. I didn't respond. 10 weeks into our 12-week timeline, we were ready for a staged rollout. Riverside's smallest region, covering about 2,000 units in western Wisconsin, would migrate first. If successful, the remaining regions would follow. The day before the migration, Samantha called me into her office. A familiar face was waiting. Carla Hayes, the man said, rising to shake my hand. I've heard a lot about you. It was Rachel Klein's chief executive officer, Thomas Becker, the man overseeing Riverside communities. All good, I hope, I said with a small smile. Thomas chuckled. Samantha tells me you've built us something that won't break every time we add a new property. Something that can actually grow with us. That's the plan, I said. I also hear you used to work for Summit Crest, he added, studying me carefully. I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. They're in trouble, you know. The private equity firm is trying to sell, but with Riverside leaving and their systems still in shambles, they're not finding many interested buyers. He paused meaningfully. Except one, Samantha said. I raised an eyebrow, though I suspected the answer. Lakeshore Systems, Samantha confirmed. We're considering making an offer at a substantial discount to what they were valued at 6 months ago. I glanced between them, processing the implications. If that happens, Thomas continued, we'd want someone who understands both companies to lead the integration. Someone who could salvage what's still valuable from Summit Crest's infrastructure while transitioning everything to your new architecture. Are you asking if I'd be willing to work on that? I asked, tilting my head. Samantha nodded. Only if the acquisition goes through, and only if you're comfortable with it. I thought about the irony. The company that had once discarded me was now on the verge of being folded into the one I'd helped strengthen. And this time, I would be the one leading the transition, not from the shadows, but from the top. If you like, I can write the next chapter where Carla takes charge of the integration. Just let me know. The system I'd built, the people I'd trained, the company that had discarded me, all potentially coming back under my direction. I'd be willing, I said finally, looking across the table at Samantha and Thomas. But I have one condition. We do it right. Full documentation, proper training, no shortcuts. Agreed, Samantha said without hesitation. We've learned that lesson. As I walked back to my office, I felt no vindication, no urge for revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that good work done right eventually speaks for itself. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of what had once been Summit Crest Housing's headquarters. The sign above the reception desk now read Lakeshore Integrated Property Management. The acquisition had gone through for less than a quarter of what the company had been valued at before my departure. Samantha and I walked the halls, greeting former Summit Crest employees who were staying on through the transition. Some looked away, their faces flushed with awkwardness. Others smiled with visible relief. And a few, those who had worked closely with me over the years, nodded in quiet understanding. Evan was gone, along with most of the executive team that had approved my dismissal. Jason Lakewood had stayed on as a consultant to help smooth the transition for legacy clients. When we reached the server room, my old domain, I paused. Through the glass, I could see the hardware I'd once specified, the blinking lights of the systems I'd designed. Want to go in? Samantha asked gently. No need, I said with a small smile. We'll be migrating everything to the new infrastructure anyway. In the main conference room, the remaining Summit Crest staff had gathered for the announcement. Samantha introduced me as the Chief Integration Officer, the one who would oversee the technical transition. Many of you already know Carla, she said warmly. She built the original systems that ran this company for nearly 2 decades. Now, she'll be guiding us through the integration of both companies' technologies into something better than either had before. As I looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some new, I felt no triumph, no desire to say, I told you so. What would be the point? Instead, I spoke briefly about the transition plan, the timeline, and the support that would be available to everyone. I emphasized one thing above all: no one would be left behind because of cost-cutting measures. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. 1 year after the acquisition, Lakeshore Integrated Property Management had become the largest property management company in the Midwest. The migration was complete. All properties were now running on the new system I had designed, fully documented, properly staffed, and functioning smoothly. On a crisp autumn morning, I drove to the office for a final meeting with Samantha. The trees along the shore of Lake Michigan were bursting with brilliant reds and golds, a fitting backdrop for the conclusion of this chapter. "The board approved your proposal," Samantha said as soon as I sat down in her office. "The Technical Education Division will launch next quarter. You'll have full autonomy to design the curriculum and hire instructors." This had been my condition for staying after the integration was complete, not a higher title or more money, but the creation of a division dedicated to training the next generation of systems engineers and architects, teaching them not just how to code, but how to build things that were meant to last. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady but warm. Samantha smiled. "No, thank you, Carla. What you've built here, it's more than systems. It's a legacy." And for the first time in years, I felt not just peace, but pride. "If you'd like, I can write an epilogue or a reflection piece from Carla's point of view. Just say the word." I said, "That means a lot." "No, thank you," Samantha replied with a warm smile. "What you've built here, Carla, it's remarkable. Not just the technology, but the culture around it, the documentation, the knowledge sharing, the emphasis on quality over quick fixes." Later that afternoon, I cleared out my integration office. Unlike my rushed and painful exit from Summit Crest, this was a planned transition into my new role. As I packed the last of my things, Jason Lakewood knocked gently on the door. "Got a minute?" he asked. We walked to the small courtyard just outside the building, the late autumn air crisp around us. "My father's asked about you," Jason said quietly. "He's retired in Florida now, but he still keeps up with company news. He was glad to hear you were back, in a manner of speaking." "How's Ray doing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "He's good," Jason chuckled. "Fishing a lot, keeping busy." He hesitated, then added, "He always said letting you go would be the biggest mistake Summit Crest could make. Turns out, he was right." I gave a small nod, unsure of what to say. "I've learned something through all this," Jason continued. "Value isn't always visible until it's gone." As I drove home along the Lake Michigan shore, I thought about that word, value. About experience. About the care it takes to do things right the first time. About systems built to last, and the people who build them. I hadn't sought revenge. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply moved forward, building something better, something that would outlast any one decision or short-term strategy. Sometimes, the best response to being undervalued is simply to prove your worth and let the results speak for themselves. I want to take a moment and speak directly to you, the audience. If Carla's story resonated with you, I invite you to show your support, not just for me, but for everyone out there who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside despite years of dedication. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What part of this journey spoke to you? Have you faced a moment where you had to walk away from a place that didn't see your value, only to thrive somewhere else? I would love to hear your stories, because this isn't just my journey, it's a reflection of so many people's lives. Here's the advice I'd offer from the heart. Never let someone else define your worth. I learned that the hard way. For years, I thought loyalty alone would protect me, that if I worked hard, stayed committed, and put my heart into what I built, it would be enough. But when you find yourself in a place that no longer respects what you bring to the table, remember this: you have the power to take your experience, your passion, and your talent somewhere that does value it. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't a dramatic confrontation or a fiery comeback. It's quiet success. It's walking away with your dignity intact and letting the results speak for themselves. And above all, it's about building something better, not just for yourself, but for the people who come after you. So, if you've ever been in Carla's shoes, or you're standing there now, know this: you are not alone. Share your thoughts, offer your encouragement, and remind each other that experience matters, and when we stand by our worth, the world eventually takes notice.